everyone, and welcome back to Murder, Lies, and Everything in Between, a true crime podcast with me, Jess, and my husband, Atty.
Hi, guys.
Hope you're all good this week. Atty's in a really fucking funny mood. He's just been winding me up continuously for the last 10 minutes before we hit record.
Because you buy it, that's why.
Yeah, I think the cold's starting to get to him. We've started to have like a little bit of snow, but it's nothing compared to what some places get, but actually had a bit of snow in the UK, which is a bit mad for us, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we're not really used to having any snow really down here. So today we are jumping into a UK case this week. The sources for today's case are, I actually looked at two different inquiries into this actual incident that happened in this case. And I actually read an independent inquiry for the NHS London, and this one was particularly based on the care of Peter Bryan, and the other one was investigating the care of Richard Loudwell, whilst he was in the care in NHS care. You all right, Atty?
I am.
Banking stuff?
I am.
So I read two of those inquiries, and they were really helpful. They gave a lot of insight into kind of, especially the second, the third attack of Richard Loudwell. So we are, if you hadn't already guessed, we're jumping into the case of Peter Bryan today. As I said, this is a UK case, and this is a serial killer case. So we have, I'll just do a trigger warning now. We have cannibalism in this one. So we have a touch of cannibalism in this week's episode, yes. So a bit of a change. Munchy munch this week. So Peter Bryan was born on the 4th of October 1969 in London to both Barbadian parents. He was the youngest of 7 children, a big family, 4 brothers and 2 sisters. His parents actually immigrated over to the UK in the 50s, and his dad actually moved over first, and his mum followed the year after. And they actually left some of his brothers and sisters back in Barbados with like their biological auntie. So kind of not all of them came over at the same time. The family moved to Newham in London when Peter was about 5. And from what I kind of read, it sounded like he had kind of like a chaotic, lonely, just like a really sad childhood, really. His mum was working a lot of hours to kind of provide for the family. So Peter and his siblings would spend a lot of time on their own and with the childminder. And when she wasn't at work, it seemed that she'd either be in Barbados with her other kind of biological children visiting there, or in America visiting her other kids. So it was just a bit of a lonely childhood. His dad was there, but it was just a bit kind of lonely for him. As you can imagine, this kind of isn't going to set you up for having kind of a healthy way of looking at relationships. In school, Peter said he barely really had any friends. He just wasn't really a happy child. He struggled to learn, and he actually turned out he had undiagnosed dyslexia. So his undiagnosed dyslexia took a massive knock to his confidence. So he wasn't very confident at all, especially in school. Starting from quite an early age, Peter had started bullying people he kind of perceived weaker than him. So he would get them to do like really silly, demeaning tasks, kind of like just the typical bullying thing. Like he would get them to like tie his shoelaces, and like he'd steal sweets off them and stuff. Like really silly, stupid things he'd get them to do. And he actually later said in an interview that he enjoyed having power over people and forcing them to do things for him. He was described by one of his teachers from around this time as being a bully who would threaten other kids for their lunch money. His excuse for kind of stealing lunch money off people was that his parents didn't give him enough money for his lunch. So this was his way of kind of getting what he needed, basically. He attended Canning Town Primary School, and he would later go on to Forest Gate for secondary school. As Peter got older, his behaviour kind of only escalated, which led on to him becoming really, really aggressive with girls at school. And it was said that like he'd touch them really inappropriately, and like he would pester them for like sex and stuff like that. And we're going on, he was like 11
Okay, so
So,
young age.
yeah, he was quite young, yeah. Especially to be doing these kind of things, pestering girls for sex at like
Yeah,
11, 12. It's really young, isn't it, to be doing that kind of behaviour?
it is. But nowadays, you know, what I mean, everyone seems to be fucking doing it. It's a fashion statement now. I find, you know what I mean?
Pestering girls for sex.
No, like youngsters, you know what I mean? I think they're in that pressure of like like a young age, you know, because they want to show off to their mates saying, "Oh, I lost mine first or whatever." You know, do you get what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say?
Yeah,
You know, it's not like how it used to be where it was like it was on a back burner when I was in
yeah.
school. Do you know what I mean?
You were kind of looked at quite badly if you lost your virginity at a youngish
Yeah, or you
age.
did something. Oh, they did this. You know what I mean? Behind the
Yeah.
bike sheds, I remember that
Oh,
things
was
like that. You know what I mean? It
it?
was
Was
like,
it bike
oh,
sheds for you?
well, yeah, you know that's what it was called. But it was
As
like,
was the bottom of the
oh,
field.
oh, sometimes it was that, but it was like, oh, they did this, and it's like, but now it's like youngsters, and I hate to say, you know, like 12, 13-year-olds are like, it's not all of them, but it is
Yeah.
like a fashion statement of like, yeah, I did this to her, like, or you know, I mean, we did this, and it's just like, it feels like they want to get ahead of each other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a bit, yeah,
I know what you're saying. Um, well, Peter actually ended up joining a gang at around kind of like the same time as this was all kind of going on. He actually got suspended for slapping a female teacher when he was only 12. Slapped a female teacher. I can't even imagine that happening at my school.
yeah.
Like 12 years old, that's madness. Peter ended up joining a gang and he started to get into kind of like light drugs, carrying a knife. Knife crime is horrific in the UK. Like it's horrific, knife crime is.
Oh, it's gone up now. It's gone up dramatically, isn't it?
Yeah, 100% so. And mugging people, which is also a very common thing. I mean, it's probably common in a lot of places, but I know that they're the big factors, especially in London. I know they're big factors. So he kind of started to get into this circle of people. He started to circulate in those group of people. As you can imagine, he wasn't going to be attending school kind of consistently, and he ended up leaving at around the age of 14 or 15, so before the legal age of actual finishing school. He did get himself a little job though, working Sundays at a market stall, and then he actually got a job later on as a cook at a local soup kitchen,
Right?
which I thought was that's quite a nice job. A job at a soup kitchen. That's you helping people kind of thing.
Yeah, after mugging them.
Yeah. Yeah. At the age of 18, he was living in a high-rise flat called the Flying Angel when he actually got into an altercation with another tenant. And he actually tried to throw him out of a sixth floor window.
What was the argument about? Does it say?
Well, the victim, was actually saying it was completely unprovoked and it came out of nowhere. He said, nothing was going on. I didn't provoke him. This will be an ongoing theme throughout this case. Unprovoked attack coming out of nowhere kind of thing. So, as I said, they kind of got into a scuffle, obviously, as he's trying to throw him out of a window. And Peter himself was actually injured. And I think he had like a cut to his head or something. But no formal charges were pursued by the police or the victim. But as I said, they stated that the attack was unprovoked and it seemingly came out of nowhere. At the age of 19, Peter decided that he wanted to go to college to get some qualifications behind him, just so he could earn better money. Obviously, he was earning not very good money on the market stall. I know minimum wage in them times, it was really poor. Like minimum wage was really low those days. So he wanted to go to college, as I said. He spent a year at West Ham College and he passed his basic English and maths exams. During this same time, he was also working as a shop assistant at a boutique, and this was owned by the parents of a girl called Nisha Chef. Although I say he was working, he wasn't working very much. He was kind of regularly disappearing for weeks at a time. He would just turn back up kind of on a whim. He'd just turn up whenever he wanted to, pretty much. So, I mean, however much we can explain that that's a job to somebody. Thankfully for him, though, this work was cash in hand, and it was also on an ad hoc basis. So it didn't really cause too much concern for the owners when he kind of did this, because he was just cash in hand. It was very casual employment. Their daughter actually worked at the shop as well in between her college hours, studying towards a degree in social science.
Right.
So this was Nisha. So it was kind of like a family-run business kind of thing. Nisha was 3 years younger than Peter, but they did seem to kind of have, from what I can see, they kind of had a casual relationship. But this was denied by both of her parents. So both of her parents said no, they categorically did not have a relationship. He denied that though. He said that they never actually got to the point where they had sex, but they did have a relationship, some kind of relationship, leading up to the events of March in 1993. In October, though, 1992, so a couple of months before this, Peter was actually caught with drugs, and he was charged with possessing a controlled drug, and he received a conditional discharge for 1 year at Snaresbrook Crown Court. So he did get caught for drugs at some point during all this. In early March, he was caught stealing clothes from the boutique he was working at, so Nisha's family's boutique. And as you can imagine, he got fired. So he got sacked for stealing, which of course would happen. As usual, though, he couldn't just take that and move on, and he began to kind of figure out a way that he could get revenge for what he perceived as being wronged. So he was pissed off that he got sacked, someone stood up to him, and he thought, do you know what? I'm not going to take this. I'm doing something about this. This is all in his very fucked up mind, what
Right.
he's thinking. On the 18th of March, 1993, at about 6:50 p.m., Nisha was in the boutique on King's Road with her 12-year-old brother manning the shop. Their mum was upstairs cooking dinner when Peter walked into the shop. Nisha was on the phone to her friend at the time, and when Peter came in, he attacked her brother with a claw hammer, so the claw side of the hammer, and just hit him over the head. He then, though, turned his attention to Nisha. She only just realised what was going on, because obviously she's on the phone at this point. She's not paying attention to him coming into the shop. And then he proceeded to hit her over the head multiple times with such force and anger that her scalp and her skull were removed, and her brain was basically exposed. Her brain tissue was exposed. Nisha's brother, obviously coming to and witnessing what was going on with his sister and his sister being brutally attacked, he ran out of the shop and kind of closely followed by Peter running after him. A witness actually saw this happen and tried to follow after them, but he lost sight of Peter and her 12-year-old brother.
Right.
Okay, so he just lost sight of them. You know, they obviously must have been running too fast. After the attack, Nisha was obviously rushed to hospital, but unfortunately she died on the way to hospital. Her injuries were just too severe to recover from. She was only 20 years old at the time of her attack. Peter, though, kind of sticking by how he is, didn't want to take accountability for his actions. And about 90 minutes later, he was found hanging from a balcony 30 to 40 feet from the ground at a block of flats in Battersea. He eventually lost his grip and he fell to his feet, like feet first, to the ground. Obviously, him falling, he's not just going to come unscathed from that. And he actually suffered fractures to both of his lower legs and his ankles. So he was injured in this. He was rushed to A&E, where he had to have pins placed into his heel bones. Yeah, imagine that. That doesn't sound fun.
No.
That does not sound fun at all. He stated later on that he had actually planned jumping headfirst in a suicide attempt, but he actually just decided not to. During treatment, Peter kept writing down a phone number when he was in the hospital, and he kind of like gave it to the senior nurse. This number actually ended up being the number of Nisha's parents. Obviously, the nurse must have figured out what was going on, because she then called the police. Okay, so the police were called on the 20th of March. Peter was actually arrested. They obviously must have put...
Two and two together.
Yeah, they put all
Yeah.
this together. That Nisha's parents were called. What happened? And obviously he must have fit the description to what was going on. So they put two and two together, and Peter was actually arrested for the murder of Nisha Chef and wounding with intent of her 12-year-old brother. So he was arrested.
Right.
Peter obviously had to recover from surgery before he could be transferred. And it wasn't until the 30th of April he was actually transferred to Brixton Prison, where he was then held on remand of the charges he was arrested for over a month ago. So it was like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
He was in hospital for, yeah. Nisha's mum made a statement about Peter a week after the murder of her daughter and the attack on her son. The situations she recalls are absolutely terrifying, and they were horrific to read, to be honest. I couldn't even imagine how scared she must have been. And I'll give you a few examples of the kind of torture that Peter actually put that family through at that boutique, that family. There was pages and pages and pages of instances that happened between Peter and the family. There was pages of them. I have just selected a couple of these instances to give you kind of an idea about how much of a bully this man was. So over kind of the past year before the attack on Nisha, he would take a hammer from a toolbox in the basement of the boutique and he would bring it upstairs to the shop and he would leave it near the back of the doors. He would even tuck it into his trousers when he was working. A hammer. When he's working. It's a really weird thing to do, isn't it?
Maybe he's getting tooled up. Maybe he's getting ready for something.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe he was in a gang.
She never asked Peter why he kept moving it, but every time she would put it away, it would just reappear upstairs. So this obviously is going to worry her because a potentially deadly weapon is just appearing continuously. Another point he talked about how easy it would be to take money from Pakistanis in East London, making it clear that he was robbing them because he knew that they wouldn't fight back. On another occasion, her makeup case containing really, really expensive items had disappeared. Peter denied having ever seen it, and he began just laughing at her. Basically, this is his boss. He's laughing in her face. She complained to her husband, and although he did actually speak to Peter about it, she felt that her husband didn't really believe her, and Peter was always polite around him.
Right.
But he was totally different around other people. Well, not even around her, just around other people. He was different. On another day, he was hanging around inside the shop and he suddenly just began kicking her in the shins. Such a weird thing to do, isn't it?
I'm flirting.
It's his boss. He's just kicking her in the shins.
A light tap, when you
it's not a light tap, no.
Why, was you there? How do you know what a light tap?
He then took a belt from a display behind the till and began to hit her around the legs with a buckle. Yeah, go on, fucking come up with a response for that. Yeah, he's laughing because he fucking knows he sounds like a douche.
I was trying to defend, you know what I mean? Because it's a sign of a touching and hitting slip. It's a bit of flirtation.
He was kicking her in the shins.
I got kicked in the shins when I was at school.
Well, I don't know what the fuck you were into, but
it was flirting.
Well, I don't want flirting if that's flirting. So as I said, he then took a belt from a display behind the till and began to hit her around the legs with the buckle of this belt. She actually went to dial the police and kind of telling Peter that she was going to call the police. He then grabbed the receiver from her and then cut off the call and ran out of the shop. So she couldn't call the police.
Yep.
Just a reminder to you all, this is her and her husband's business, and he's treating her this way. Like, who would ever treat their boss in this way? Because that's exactly what she is. She is his boss, and he is treating her in this way. It just shows...
Well, he's got no respect for her, is he? Or the business.
None at all, no. just hopefully this can kind of give you an idea of exactly what type of person Peter Bryan is. So you've got kind of a good clear picture of what kind of person he is. Whilst in remand in prison, he was actually involved in 2 separate altercations with fellow prisoners, despite him being in a fucking wheelchair. He was in a wheelchair and he was getting into a fight with other prisoners. I mean, what can you do in a wheelchair?
Run him over.
Maybe, yeah. Because of these fights, he was assessed by nurses at the forensic psychiatry unit of the hospital, and he was actually thought that he was at risk of causing potential harm to others. And then he was actually, because of this, he was transferred to the interim secure unit at Hackney Hospital, who assessed him for 2 hours on the 5th of October 1993. During this interview, it was ascertained that he was suffering from some sort of paranoid psychosis, which may well have been a schizophrenic illness. Okay, so there is mental illness there. There's some kind of mental illness there. He recommended a referral for admission to the Rampton High Secure Hospital for assessment under Section 35 of the Mental Health Act. Prior to his court appearance, which was due in the second week of December 1993. Okay, so he had to be basically referred to this secure hospital for an assessment before his trial, before he had to go to court.
Yeah.
Peter's justification for the murder was that over the 10 years he'd worked at the shop, he had become increasingly attracted to Nisha, but was aware
Told you it was flirting.
That her parents disapproved and that Nisha was frightened that if he allowed his love for her to be too obvious, her father would send her back to relatives in India. Consequently, her parents would hardly ever kind of let her out of their sight. But in spite of their relationship had developed over 5 to 6 years, it kind of developed into physical contact, he said, which he said was always be initiated by Nisha. However, whenever he tried to take this further, she would pull away and he began to feel that he was being deliberately teased by her and he was less sexually frustrated. Okay? I will just say now, he was a virgin up until the end of these deaths.
And how old was she?
She was 3 years younger.
Right.
So she was 20, he was 23.
Right.
And he was a virgin.
Oh, you're still a virgin?
At this, yeah,
right,
he was still a virgin, yeah. I don't give a shit if he's still a virgin now. I couldn't give a fuck. But he was a virgin when all this stuff was going on.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact because it made it clear that he was. And these feelings apparently of frustration added to the increasing pressure that he'd felt since his return from Barbados. So he'd actually been to Barbados to go and visit.
Yeah.
And when he came back, apparently lots of shit happened and this kind of pushed him over the edge with Nisha.
Okay.
He'd come home to find that money that he'd hidden under the floorboards in the flat had been stolen. His radio and other belongings that he owned were smashed. The electric had been cut off, and his brother no longer actually lived there. He blamed these developments on his brother's girlfriend, who he actually accused of reading his diary and harassing him.
Right.
Peter also believed that his neighbours on either side of him were deliberately annoying him by standing at the dividing walls, listening to everything he was doing and copying his actions. So if he went upstairs, he could hear them going upstairs too. And if he used the toilet, they would simultaneously use their toilet. And they did this apparently because they wanted him to suffer, because they didn't want him around anymore. This is what he's thinking in his mind with this mental illness.
Yeah.
This is what he's genuinely believing, that his neighbours are all doing these things to piss him off, basically. He said that the sexual frustration arising out of Nisha's behaviour towards him, the behaviour of his brother's girlfriend, and the pressures at home, together with his feelings of belonging neither in Barbados or in England, had become to kind of get on top of him. He became worried that a hammer that he had at home could be as much as a weapon as a gun was, and that he might be drawn into using it if people put him under a lot of pressure. He had therefore decided that he'd take it to the shop and leave it there, as he had done earlier with 2 knives, which had similarly worried him. He said that after thinking about it all day, he set off for the shop at about 5 p.m, taking the hammer with him, And on the way, he decided that it was about time that he found out where he stood with Nisha. He went into the shop, he walked towards her with the hammer in his hand and called her name. He thought she turned around and said, "Rape me, make me." This doesn't make any sense, but again, he's suffering with a mental illness, so he's not thinking straight. These things are in his head.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's not saying these things to him. Why would she say this
No,
to
it's a
him?
bit weird, yeah.
Yeah. He had responded by hitting her with the hammer, and his explanation being the relationship had to end or move on. My hand went up, and that was that.
And that's what he said.
This is what he said, yeah. In his like when he's being assessed.
Right.
He's telling them all these things, and these things are all quoted in this inquiry and stuff that I read. All these quotes are made by him. He said that he was aware of hitting her 4 or 5 times and that she did actually protect herself from the first 2 blows, but that she did not tell him to stop and only looked into his eyes. Apparently, on quote, she said, because she really didn't give a damn and just wanted to get out. That's what he said. He also said that at some point she said he must jump off a building. That's what he said, that
And
she said while being attacked.
Yeah, and this is obviously why he tried to jump off, yeah?
Yeah, apparently, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'll just say now, he hadn't taken any drugs and he hadn't drank any alcohol for a few days. So it's not down to alcohol or anything like that. So prior to Peter's trial, he actually sent a letter to Nisha's dad apologising. This was just a measly attempt. And he even asked for him to send his clothes to prison.
From the dad?
Yeah, asked Nisha's dad to send his clothes to prison.
It's a big favour to ask, isn't it, when you just murdered your child?
Exactly. He's just killed his daughter.
Yeah.
And you're asking him to send your clothes. Get fucked. No, he's not going to send your fucking clothes. Go without. Peter claimed that he thought that he was mentally stable at the time and he didn't feel he was suffering any mental illness. It was ascertained, though, that the only part of schizophrenia he actually suffered was the paranoia part of it, and this would be heightened with stress. He fit the criteria for a plea of diminished responsibility under Section 2 of the Homicide Act 1957. So he did fit the criteria for diminished responsibility. On the 25th of February 1994 at the Old Bailey, Peter Bryan pleaded not guilty to the murder, but pleaded guilty to manslaughter of Nisha Sheff on the grounds of diminished responsibility, and not guilty to wounding Nisha's brothers with intent, but guilty to wounding him. Court was adjourned until the 4th of March, and when they returned, he was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility and wounding. He was sent to Rampton Secure Hospital for treatment after this. During his time there, he was described by doctors as being abusive and violent to staff and fellow patients. At an interview on the 25th of April 1994, Peter said that he felt that he should remain, in his quotes, locked up, either in prison or in hospital for the rest of his life for what he'd done, both to punish him and to prevent him from reoffending. During his treatment on the 1st of August 1995, Peter burned a male member of the domestic staff with his cigarette and then walked off laughing. On another occasion, he was seen by one of the nursing staff attempting to steal something, but when questioned about it in private, he completely just denied it, stating that staff were idiots and they were just a set of liars, in his words. He then voiced the opinion that he was above the law and he could do as he liked and that nobody could do anything to prevent him. He had been stable. After this, he'd been stable on a low dose of medication for about 2 years, and they felt that he could kind of cope. Well, he felt he could cope without it. Right. He felt that he could cope without any drugs. He persisted in this view, despite being advised that there was a great risk of a breakdown in his mental health if his medication were to be reduced. It was recommended by a forensic social worker that it seemed appropriate for Peter to be transferred to an environment of lower security and that he needs to move to a more challenging setting to further his rehabilitation. This is a really dangerous thing to do. You saw how he broke before with Nisha for nothing. He's clearly not mentally stable. So to risk putting him into a lower security setting isn't going to end well. A nursing report concluded that throughout his time in Rampton, Peter actually made considerable progress in behaviour, attitude, maturity, relationships, anger management, and insight, although further work was required in the areas of substance misuse. On the 1st of November 2000, Peter Bryan was requested a mental health review tribunal hearing. So that was my glasses if you just heard that click, sorry. His lawyer actually requested a mental health review tribunal. And in January 2001, a solicitor was instructed to represent Peter in his tribunal, and he requested a copy of his medical records. Peter was eventually granted reduced incarceration, and he was transferred to the John Howard Centre in Hackney on the 12th of July 2001, under the care of a consultant forensic psychiatrist. He apparently seemingly was progressing, and he was transferred to the Riverside Hostel. And there were a few instances there, but nothing to note really. And the psychiatrist said that he was making more progress and that he could move onto a more independent living situation. So on the 17th of February 2004, Peter was released, and hours later he would go on to perform his next murder. So, hint on what I just said, hours after being
released from
granted his independent living, hours later. Peter had met a man called Brian Cherry through a friend who visited the hostel regularly. Brian had his own flat, he had his own money behind him, but unfortunately, anyone in this situation with money, unfortunately, this made him a target for people. And he found himself being used and abused by drug users, mainly women. Okay, mainly women were using him and abusing him. At around 6 p.m, Peter knocked on Brian's door. He pushed him out of the way. So when Brian opened the door, he pushed him out of the way, pushed him into the flat. There was kind of a bit of a struggle. We're unsure why he even went over there, but when he got inside, we know that he attacked Brian with a claw hammer. Same thing as what he'd attacked Nisha with. He then just began hacking at him and removing both of his arms and his right leg from his body.
Just with this hammer?
No. He attacked him with a claw hammer.
Oh, okay. So he doesn't say what tool he used. I thought he just...
No, I'll tell you in a minute what he actually used. He just began hacking at him. After he was attacked, he began hacking at him, and he removed his right leg and both of his arms from his body. He's not happy with just this, though. He then proceeded to cut off chunks of flesh from his left leg, and then he put it in a pan on the cooker.
Oh.
Again, not satisfied with this, he then removed sections of Brian's brain and proceeded to cook it in a pan with clover butter and eat it.
It's like Silence of the Lambs here.
It is a little bit like that, yeah. At about 7:30 p.m, one of Brian's friends, Nicola Newman, turned up at his house to get some money and some cigarettes off him. When she got to the door, she kind of knocked it. There was no answer. So the door apparently had been damaged already. So
Right.
she managed to get into the door without, it didn't apparently lock properly or something. And as soon as she opened the door, she could smell disinfectant. She thought this was kind of really odd. And as soon as she kind of walked in, Peter kind of walked out of the room, out of the living room, and he had no top on and he was covered in blood. He had a kitchen knife in his hand. She asked where Brian was, and he told her that he was dead. She managed to kind of look around the corner into the living room, and she saw him lying on the floor. Yeah, she saw him lying on the floor. She saw that one of his arms was missing, and she fucking freaked, as you can imagine. She managed to hide this from Peter, though, and she kind of just said, "Oh, okay, yeah, no worries," and turned around and rushed out. Peter quickly followed behind her and locked the door behind. So kind of followed her out of the situation. When she got back into the car that was waiting for her outside, obviously she was fucking terrified at this. She didn't know what to do, so she asked her friend if she could just take her home. She went to her mum's and she told her mum what she'd seen, and her mum obviously said, "Look, you need to call 999. Like, you need to call the police and report this."
You think you should have called 999 in the first place? Straight away,
Yeah.
kind of thing. I know she was in shock.
Yeah, this is, I'll be honest with you, this does come up a few times. Like, not, I won't refer to it again, but she's questioned about police from this. Like,
Yeah.
why did you only...
But I suppose if you're in shock, you know what I mean?
So there's another reason why, excuse me, why she was actually hesitant to call them, and it's because she actually had a warrant out for her arrest.
Right, okay.
So you can
sense.
kind of understand why she was so hesitant, yeah. And her mum ended up actually calling for her. So her mum called the police in the end. At 7:45, 2 officers were alerted to a call at Brian Cherry's flat where her man had been seen there who had been seriously assaulted, and apparently his arm had been ripped off. Wasn't known whether he was alive or dead. So I'm assuming this is the information they were given by that girl's mum.
Right.
She must have just kind of said this little bit of information just to get the police over there. When they arrived at the flat, they knocked several times at the door, but obviously there was no answer. And they decided to force entry. Obviously, the door was broken already, so it wasn't hard for them. And they were actually in shock when they got in there. Peter greeted them at the door, still covered in blood, no top on, nothing. Exactly.
So he hadn't left the crime scene. He just stood there, right?
Still there, yeah. And he admitted what he'd done. Completely just admitted what he'd done. He was obviously immediately arrested and placed into handcuffs. While they were waiting for a police van to arrive, he said, quote, "I did it. Yeah, I don't know why I did it." And when one of the police officers went into the kitchen, he watched her go in and said with a smirk, quote, I ate his brain with butter. It was very nice."
At least he was honest about it. I can't say.
He also then said, "I wanted his soul." What do you have to say about that?
At least, like I said, at least he was
honest.
At least he's honest. You know what I mean? So I can't take that away from him.
Don't you all love how much he can justify stuff? I've never known someone that can justify things.
Well, no, you get some people
the way my husband can.
Like, caught at the crime scene. Now, wasn't me, mate. Got blood and knife in his hand. That wasn't me. I found
Prove
him like
it.
This. Yeah, that's it. You know what I mean? I found him like this.
Yeah.
But like I said, obviously there's something wrong with him, as we know.
Clearly, yeah.
But yeah, like there's not a lot to say about him.
No.
Apart from he's honest.
He's honest,
yeah.
yeah.
No, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I did this. I wanted to try this," and that.
Yeah.
And that was the end of it. Obviously, he's obviously mentally unstable.
100%.
I don't think he should have ever got released or anything like that. But again, we're not doctors, psychiatrists, and all that. So
yeah, I mean, well, when Peter was asked why he actually dismembered Brian Cherry, he said, quote, "I wanted to carry him out bit by bit and get rid of the body. I used a Stanley knife to cut them off and some other kitchen knives, but I had to stamp on them to break the bone," end quote. This was actually confirmed in a post-mortem examination as well.
Right, yeah.
So he did do this. So he cut them off with a Stanley knife, other kitchen knives, and he actually did break bones by stamping on them. Can you just imagine that? Oh, that sounds horrific, doesn't it? Snapping them with your legs. Oh. On 1:44 a.m. on the 18th of February, a principal, forensic medical examiner, and a psychiatrist attended Barkyside Hospital, police station, to examine Peter Bryan. They concluded that he was fit to be detained and questioned by police because obviously he's seemingly mentally unstable.
Yeah.
Peter was subsequently interviewed by police and he was charged with the murder of Brian Cherry and he was remanded in custody. Initially, he was at a Pentonville prison, and then on the 23rd of February, he was transferred to Belmarsh prison. Belmarsh is quite a famous prison in the UK, Belmarsh is, along with another place that he was also put into in a minute. Over the next few weeks, his condition deteriorated and his behaviour became so unpredictable that on the 15th of April 2004, he was transferred to Broadmoor Hospital. Broadmoor is a very, very famous hospital, and he was actually detained under Section 48 and 49 of the Mental Health Act 1983, and he was admitted to the Luton ward in the hospital. Unfortunately, though, Brian Cherry's murder wouldn't have been his last murder. And on the 25th of April at 6 p.m., just 10 days after his admission to Broadmoor Hospital, he was inside the dining hall when he attacked fellow patient Richard Loudwell, strangling him with the cord from his trousers. He then began to bang his head repeatedly against the floor, a table, a wall, all over a sustained period of time. To answer the questions that you're probably asking in your head, where the fuck in a secure hospital, in a high risk hospital, why is he not being watched? They weren't being watched at the time, or monitored, checked on in any way, shape, or form. They were the only two that were in the dining hall at the time.
So where were the guards or the doctors or anyone like that, nurses?
So this is what this internal investigation covers as well.
Okay.
I'll cover that in a minute. I'll explain to you. So as pissed off as people will be about how the fuck can this happen in a secure hospital where very, 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 very dangerous people are, how can this happen? How the fuck can this happen?
Yeah.
It's madness how this can happen. So he got tired after beating the shit out of this man. And he didn't kill him at this point. So he decided to just leave the room and go and take a rest. So he just left the room, went and chilled out in another room.
I'm so amazed for a secure hospital
how this can happen.
They're just allowed to walk around freely.
They're not.
So where was his guard, doctor, whoever's supposed to be watching?
I'll tell you in a minute.
Right, okay.
Because this whole inquest where I got a lot of this information from, people were jumping because this shouldn't have happened. This should never have been able to fucking happen. And just as a little side note, the other day I actually looked I watched a documentary of Inside Broadmoor, and when you watch this documentary, you can find it on the internet. It's really good, but it covers a lot of the treatment inside Broadmoor,
Right.
because it is an NHS facility. It is a mental health facility, and there's different rankings in Broadmoor that you can kind of be in there for, and you get put on different wards depending on what you're there for.
Yeah.
And now I know that. I mean, maybe a lot of that stuff was put into place because of stuff like this happening. But basically, a member of staff went into the dining room and they found Richard Loudwell lying on the floor with a serious injury. So they did eventually go into the room and find him. He was still alive, but his injuries were life-threatening. He was taken to Frimley Park Hospital by ambulance, where he remained unconscious until he actually passed away on the 5th of June 2004. So he did die. Peter admitted causing the injuries to Richard, and he claimed that he'd been planning the attack on him for a few days because he was vulnerable and he wasn't entitled to live, in his words. An internal investigation concluded that at the time of the incident, 3 members of staff were actually observing the corridors and 3 were on an extended break.
What do you mean by extended break?
Just an extended break.
Right.
That left 3 to supervise. So there should be 9, basically. There should be 3, 3, and 3.
Yep.
Yeah, they work in teams of 3. That left 3 to supervise the day room, the smoking room, the dining room, and the toilets. At the time of the incident, all of these 3 people were in the office attending to administrative duties, as they said, and no member of staff was in the day room at all. We do not know how long this had been the case for, but it was clearly long enough for the assault on Richard to take place. I read further bits into this inquest, and it said that they've got to perform administrative duties. Yeah, I understand that, but why have they got to perform admin duties when people of high risk that are known to be violent are on their own?
Yeah, it's just yeah.
Why would you do? Why?
It doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't you wait for the other three to come back for their extended break?
Yeah,
Come back, then go right. Then the other three
and then
go,
do it.
and then go do it.
There's 9 of you. It's not like you're
Yeah,
short-staffed,
it don't make sense to me. It feels a bit iffy to me.
doesn't it?
So I could be wrong.
In October, Peter Bryan was charged with both murders of Brian and Richard, and the order was granted that both the cases could be tried together. So they weren't tried separately, they were tried together.
Right.
4 psychiatrists, 2 for the prosecution and 2 for the defence, provided reports for the court, giving their opinion that Peter was seriously mentally ill, and that the prosecution subsequently acknowledged that at the time of both murders, Peter was suffering from a severe mental illness and accepted his plea of not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility again, so what he was charged with before. On the 15th of March, his sentencing hearing started at the Old Bailey. Usually, a conviction for manslaughter gives the judge kind of some discretion, and he can impose a discretionary life sentence, or he can determine the sentence of imprisonment or a hospital order under the Mental Health Act.
Right.
However, because Peter Bryan had already been previously convicted of a serious offence, he was subject to the 2 strikes rule. This meant that the judge had no option but to impose an automatic life sentence in respect of each murder. So he got 2 life sentences for this under the 2 strikes rule. This meant that Peter Bryan was to spend a minimum of 35 years incarcerated.
And that's 2 life sentences.
In the UK, yeah.
I thought it was 25 years in the UK. Has that changed?
No. So you've got to remember, it's manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. It's ever so slightly differently, just because it gives the judge the order to give a life sentence. They don't have to give that.
Right.
They can give any less than that. Okay, they don't have to give that. It's just discretionary, so they can decide whether they give you it or not. This wasn't where it ends, though. Peter actually appealed against the 35-year tariff. I don't know why you would appeal against it when you've committed 2 murders. You're lucky to get 35 years. He's lucky to have only got that. He actually appealed to the Court of Appeals, and Lord Chief Justice reduced the minimum term to 15 years.
Oh my God.
Because of the fact that the killings were committed when Peter was suffering from severe mental illness. The only silver lining to this was the fact that the court indicated that it was unlikely that Peter Bryan would ever be released. So they're basically saying, yeah, well, the minimum is going to be 15 years. Your minimum is 15 years. But do you know what? You're probably never going to be released anyway.
Yeah, but how do you know
It's
that?
not guaranteed that
you
he's not going to be
If he
released.
serves his 15 years, I take it he's obviously still in prison now.
So he's in Broadmoor, yeah. So he's still in Broadmoor, where he committed that murder of Richard Loudwell. He's still there.
And the young girl.
Well, no, he didn't commit that murder of her in the hospital.
No, but he still did it though, didn't he?
Yeah, he
You know what I
committed the
mean?
murder of Nisha
So he still
and
murdered
Brian Cherry and
he
Richard Loudwell.
So he murdered 2 people. Solid, obviously the other one, and he only got technically 15.
Well, no, he
years.
killed him.
Okay.
Richard Loudwell, he killed him.
So 15 years.
Yeah.
5 years apiece. It's not a lot, is it?
Basically, three murders.
Yeah, 5 years apiece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fucking madness to think that 15 years for 3 murders, essentially. So he could be out before he hits retirement age. It doesn't matter how many...
How old is he now?
I'm not sure how old he is now, but he was born in the late 60s.
Right, okay.
So he's still young enough. If he does get out and he does recover, it was notified. It was said by a couple of psychiatrists that he's the kind of person, his mental illness shows in such a way that it will come out of nowhere. So he'll be normal, in their eyes, normal. So nothing will be happening with him. He won't be stressed. He won't be aggressive. He won't be angry. He'll just be kind of at a very normal level. And then all of a sudden, he'll just turn.
He'll just click.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what they made very clear, that this is how his mental illness works. But I don't know how you can reduce his sentence to 15 years on a court of appeal. I get it's diminished responsibility and I get it's mental health, but 15 years for
So
2
3.
murders. Well, 2 for the second one. He was already charged for the others and
Yeah.
released Phoenicia.
It's just,
What do you say to that?
I don't think he should be released at all. I think like
No.
after he's served his 15 years, maybe she needs to go to, I don't know, some kind of hospital and looked over.
Yeah.
Because obviously he's not in a good place. His mental health is obviously not in a good
Yeah.
stable. Like you said, what's it going to take for him? He might be all right, but like you said, it could just be one day he's all right, next day bang, it
Yeah.
clicks, and then somebody else gets murdered.
Yeah.
Can we prevent that murder by not releasing him
By
in the
not releasing him.
first
Yeah.
place?
Yeah. They as I read the pages, I said to you, babe, didn't I, yesterday or the day before when I was reading it? I said I'm already on page 89, and I've still got there's fucking hundreds of pages in this inquest. A lot of it goes into a lot of it. As you can imagine, it's an NHS inquest, so it's detailed. It has to be, obviously. So there's a lot of information on that. But they made it clear that in the inquest that after the murder of Nisha, he was under the care of a social worker that had only been in the job for 4 months. So this man of high risk was in the care of a social worker that had only been qualified to do her job for 4 months. How can you would put him under somebody
Who's more
that is
experienced?
experienced, that
Oh, for sure.
knows what they're doing. It's just craziness. I mean, could Brian Cherry's and Richard Loudwell murders have been kind of avoided? Yeah, they could have if he wasn't released the first time.
But we said that in a lot of our episodes, and a few of our episodes, we said, well, if they looked into it more, if the doctors didn't do this, they could have prevented
Yeah,
the murders,
yeah, we
But
have, yeah.
is it they just wanted to release them because they can't bother to do the paperwork anymore?
Get them out the
Yeah,
system.
just get them out of the system because
Mm.
there's other people. I don't know. It's hard one to say, isn't it?
It's really hard, yeah. I mean, I'm never going to profess that I'm a mental health worker. I know anything really about mental health apart from the things I've experienced myself.
Yeah.
But I think we all have common sense when it comes to stuff.
Yeah, you would think.
And
But we're living in a time now, and I'm not saying about, I'm not disrespecting mental health or anything like that, but you do have a lot of people milking that card,
a lot of people play on it, yeah. And
you know.
they then, I feel that the people that are really suffering can get overlooked because of it.
And that's the problem, like, because you've got one
Yeah.
hand that people are suffering from mental health or depression or anxiety, and I understand that, but then you've got the other people who will just milk that card
Yeah.
for whatever reason, for benefit, or they just can't be
Yeah.
bothered to do work or whatever,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then it's just, and how do you say yes
They're being genuine?
yeah, they are being genuine,
You
and
don't
how
know.
you don't, do you know what I
No.
mean? So, I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush, but we hear this a lot. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like, oh, I've got mental health. I'm worried about money. If you're worried about money, go work.
Yeah.
That's my solution for money. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And people say, oh, I suffer from anxiety and things like that. And I said, I'm not a mental health worker. I'm not
No.
qualified in that.
Anxiety is a horrible thing to suffer with. And depression is a horrible thing to
I
suffer with.
understand that. Do you know what I mean? Because as Jess, my partner, knows, I suffer from anxiety from time to time, only on certain things, guys. You know what I mean? In certain
Yeah.
things, but I just
You get
literally,
quite anxious.
I can get quite anxious, but I just go for it. I just do it. Do you know what I mean? Because then when I've done it, or when I'm in the middle of doing it, it's like, what was I really
What you
anxious?
worried
Yeah, do you know
about?
what I mean? And I understand you do worry and you build yourself up, and you're like, oh my god, do you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
just do it, because if you're gonna let that
Stop
you, you're never ever gonna get nowhere. You
Yeah,
know
of
what I
course.
mean?
You're holding yourself back.
It's only you.
It's so hard
It
to
is,
do,
and
but
it's only you and your mind that's holding yourself back. It's not
Yeah.
like it's your partner or anyone
it's not
else.
physical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's your mental. It's how your brain is operating.
Yeah.
And that's why I think people have anxiety to do certain things. But if
Yeah.
I know people. I speak to some of my guys who work for me, and they say, like, like they write about money and all this. The answer for that for me is, I always say
Just
to them,
work more.
it's work more.
Yeah.
Whether you have to get a second job or whether you have to do
Yeah, of
overtime.
course.
I know people don't want to work, and it's easy, especially in the UK, it's easy just to sponge off the government. But You know, that's my answer to that. Work
Yeah.
more.
I mean, mental health's a really hard thing, and we're not mental health workers.
No.
But I think everyone listening, we all have common sense. This man should probably not, well, he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have been released in the first place. He should have been placed under the care of someone that has more experience, is more qualified to deal with somebody of with such a complex kind of criteria of mental health illnesses, I would say. But what did you all think of that case today? It was a bit of a disgusting one, to be honest. A little bit of a cannibalism for you,
So it's a bit calm
bit of
compared to what we have.
light cannibalism for
Yeah.
you for a Sunday. But we hope you all enjoyed this week's episode. We enjoyed looking into it and having a read of it. And have a good weekend, guys, and follow us on our socials as normal. And thank you very much. We'll catch you guys next week.
Thank you, guys. Bye bye.
Bye.